I'm Larry Rinder. I'm the director of the Berkeley Art Museum and Pacific Film Archive, and it's a real pleasure and an honor to be here tonight with Lawrence Weiner. And of course, Lawrence is here on the occasion of his art wall installation. And before I go any farther, I want to thank the funders of the Art Wall program, Francis Hellman and Warren Breslau, for their incredible generosity in making this program possible. So thank you, Francis and Warren. Lawrence probably needs no introduction for those of you here, but I think it's safe to say that he is he's a legend. He is one of the most important artists working in the United States today. His influence is can't be measured. He has really changed art, which not many people can claim to have done, and opened up just incredible new areas for people to work in. And I think your insight about the nature of art and its relationship to society is profound, and I'm so honored that you're here with us in Berkeley.
Well, let's try to find something interesting to talk about.
All right. Well, I think that would be...
Besides me.
No,
I
no.
find myself interesting, don't worry.
Yeah.
It's not any false modesty, okay?
I do think we should start with you, because I think that actually, in your case, maybe there is something about your biography that connects to the work. And if I'm wrong, just tell me. But I would like to ask if you could talk a little bit about your upbringing. I know that class is very important to your work, issues about class and economy. And what was your own upbringing? What environment did you grow out of, and what were the forces that shaped your understanding of society?
That's a hard one. That's laying responsibility on people who were just trying to survive. My background is I grew up in New York City, which at the time was the luckiest thing that could have happened, because it was the time of McCarthy in the United States. And I was a slum kid. So I was living in the South Bronx. I'd take the tests like everybody else. But the teachers that were being afforded to you were not people who were looking for a house in the country or something. They were committed people. And McCarthy was having them all fired from Northwestern, from here and from there. So essentially, you can find yourself in a public school if you got into it, Stuyvesant, or the little better junior high schools that were not so violent. And they were teaching, they had families to support. But they were the people who had invented quantum. They were the people who could talk to you about what social justice really was. And they were the people, when you walked into a room, when I was in like lower school, Mrs. Scipione would have on the wall, "Remember, the enemy is white." Because that's something that in our time we don't understand, and if we had, we wouldn't have Trump. That there's a certain kind of mom and pop philosophy that is violently anti-intellectual, and it's ethnic, because you don't want your son to be better than your husband. I was brought up in a different way. My parents were luckily quite nice to me. They were just working class people, but my father went off to the war and it sort of screwed up his life. But everything was fine. He came back and he tried to be a success. He wasn't. But they were very kind to me, so I don't have any horror stories or anything. I didn't have anti-intellectual parents. The final denouement was I must have been 15 and a half, 16. And I looked at my mother and I said, "Listen, I ain't going to be the philosophy professor they think I'm going to be." I was already a year in college. I'm not going to do this. I'm certainly not going to teach in grade school the way I wanted. I thought that men should be teaching children. I'm going to be an artist. And my mother's answer was not, "Oh, how this or that." Her answer was an interesting one. It was maybe profound. She said, "Lawrence, you'll break your heart." And I said, "Why?" And she said, "Well, art is for rich people and ladies. Women and rich people. Otherwise, you ain't got and she had a foul mouth, "You ain't got a fucking chance in hell." And you know something very strange? Nowadays, you don't have a fucking chance in hell unless you're willing to accept what middle-class people want. You become an exotic. You become a token, whatever the hell you are. A token Samoan Mexican. A token this. Who the hell wants to grow up to be a token? It's really, we're integers just as much as we're supposed to be. So that was what led me into it. The reason I came to California was I thought that San Francisco would understand, because I was so impressed with Jacques Prévert and so impressed by Ginsberg and all of this and the press. I got out here on my thumb, didn't know anybody. I lived rough for a while, a couple of weeks.
What year did you first come here, and how old were you?
I left high school when I was 58 or something. No, I went to college, so it was 59. Because I had a year and I got tired of it and it wasn't what I wanted. And I came out here and my gosh, my life opened up. I looked at it and I thought, all the things that they used to call me a dirty, pinko, queer, bastard, faggot, something for, fuck them. I could do quantum. And they taught me in my public school. Now my dream is that everybody could be taught this in their school. And do you know the interesting thing about art? I'm 75 years old. I've been showing publicly since I'm 18 at my first big shows. I had a big show in New York by the time I was in the early 20s. Is that most people are not stupid. If you take the trouble to show them what you're doing, in fact, they do understand. Of course they do. They may not know the use for it, and that's the job of education. To teach them how to use what you understand, not to tell them things that you think they won't understand. Of course they understand. If somebody works in a shop, they can count in their head faster than you can pee, practically. So it was a whole other attitude. And I came out here and happily people were quite nice to me, but I couldn't live out here.
So what was the environment that you were living in when you came to San Francisco? It was North Beach. It was 1958.
It was North Beach. It was 1958. It was like Alan Watts in Sausalito, Varda in Sausalito.
On the houseboat.
On the houseboat.
On the Vallejo.
Yeah,
Did you stay on the Vallejo?
I didn't sleep in Varda's boat. I slept in Alan Watts' boat one night. But that's because there was no way to get me across the bridge. There was a riot or something.
But how on earth, you're a 17, 18-year-old from New York, how do you end up with Varda and Watts on the houseboat?
Aspiration? I have no idea. You know, go and talk to musicians. How the hell did you get to be a backup in that recording? I don't know. If you're capable and you're wanting to do it, those things fall into place. You can take all the credit you want as a young artist, as a young intellectual, or as an older one, that you brought it together. In fact, you didn't. You were in the right place at the right time. And again, the Tennessee Williams biography, the kindness of strangers becomes the most important thing in our culture. The reason I'm upset about we have this graduate school crap, and this elitism and this exclusionism, those things don't happen to people, the kindness of strangers.
So that world then of the North Beach, the beat poets.
It was so open you couldn't believe it. It was just a hard world. You wanted to be part of it. You worked all night on the docks, unloading
So not
ships.
an art world, but a heart world? Did I hear you correctly?
Hard world,
Heart
art world.
I like that.
You worked all night on the docks. If you happened to be the wrong color, you worked in hospitals all night.
Did you work?
White people worked on the docks, and non-white people worked in hospitals because they wouldn't let them on the docks.
Were you working?
Girls.
What?
What about girls?
On the docks, it was a little hard. I don't know. I don't know. You know, I only know the girls I grew up with. I don't know what it must have been like to be a lower class girl, because I had a different situation. I could tell my parents, go fuck off. In the end, they couldn't. I don't know why. It was religions and ethnics. And the world used to be in a big mess. It was a nice mess. You had no idea what somebody's parents were like or anything else, and sometimes it was a very pleasant surprise. And
So,
sometimes scary.
were you thinking of yourself more in relation to the philosophers like Alan Watts, or the poets, the beat poets who were around then, or the artists? Or was everyone in one community?
I'm going to say something that sounds very snotty, but by the time I was 16, I had sat down and thought it through, where I could have been a philosophy professor because I'm a logician. I decided being an artist was not such a bad thing.
By 16.
Yeah, but then if I was going to try it, let's do it right.
So did you know about people like Bruce Conner before you came to San Francisco?
Yeah, I did, but I was living in New York on the Lower East Side, and that whole Greenwich Village thing. Yes, we knew all about Bruce Conner. We knew all about, of all things, Michael McCracken, which nobody knows about. From Batman Gallery, he was showing there. John Altoon sort of adopted me when I got out here and introduced me to a lot of people. And John Altoon turned up again in the 70s in Los Angeles when the so-called incursion of the Conceptual thing was. John Altoon was one of the people who introduced Seth to Terrell, and this one to this one, and this one to that one. Again, it's without this generosity, without opening it up and breaking down the barriers, nothing will happen of any worth. You'll get things that might sell very well, but in fact they're worth nothing. And that's a pity, because everything that people spend time to do should be worth something.
So you remember the Batman Gallery, which I think was started by Conner, is that?
No, it wasn't started. I only know it because he had some people in his studio who that I knew. I don't know how the Batman Gallery was started. I do know when I went in there, they treated me with a little bit of dignity, and I liked it.
Right. I think that gallery, and I think now it was actually started by the fellow whose nickname was Batman. It wasn't Conner, but the ethos of it was very much an openness to experimentation and innovation and sort of.
It wasn't even an openness. It was not assuming an authoritative role. The problem with the educational system is that, you know, the purpose of a university is the academy, as we know it, is to present solutions or something for people. The purpose of art is to ask questions. They're not compatible. I'm envious of colleagues of mine and friends who've been able to teach, because I like to talk to people about things and make art. I can't. I'm exhausted at the end of it. I've done seminars and all. Each one of those people you're responsible for. If you're a certain class, you're not responsible for anything. It's all yours. But if you don't accept that, you're responsible. That's a human being that's giving up their time for you to say something about what you know. Well, there's not much left afterwards. And art is not an illustration.
What is it?
It's a reality. It's a physical reality that you, as the public, since nobody asked for it and nobody's asking them to pay for it, better figure out how to use, because if you don't, by the time you turn around, you're not there anymore.
So one of your first pieces, or at least the first one that I know of, was a piece that really seems to have tried to get to this sense of immediacy and reality. It was called Cratering,
Cratering.
Cratering.
Yes.
So what was that, and
well,
how did it
leading
come
up to
be?
that was an enormous amount of work that I was convinced was going to change the world, and some of them were nice paintings. I have no problem.
But they were paintings.
They were paintings.
Of what
or
kind,
sculpture,
generally?
Or things that I left on the side of the road.
Really?
Yeah, of course.
Like what?
Sculptures. Johnny Appleseed mentality.
Ah, that's right. I've heard you talk about that. And so when you hitchhiked from New York to San Francisco, were you thinking of yourself as a Johnny Appleseed of art?
More or less.
Yeah.
And when I hitchhiked back again, and when I hitchhiked to Denver, when I hitchhiked to Ciudad de Mexico, and when I hitchhiked to Vancouver, yes.
And
thinking
leaving
that,
art
of
along
course,
the way.
I was the most, I was 16, 17 and a half years old. My ego was certainly large enough to think that what I was doing was going to change the world. And if it wasn't, there was something wrong with me, then I should have just gotten, mom and pop it.
So how did you think these things you were left by the side of the road were
I
going to change
have
the
no
world?
idea. How did I think these things? That's like asking Newton, did you get a bump on your head from the apple that hit you? I mean, who the hell remembers?
Right. Well, cratering, for example. We remember this is
I know what that was.
So
and
what
I
was
made
it?
a mistake in that one. It's very funny. I did something that entered into history that changed everybody's idea of reality, and I was convinced that each one was a separate thing, not a generalization, that each crater was a separate thing. It turned out it took me 6 years later that I realized it is very important what you did, but it weren't the same thing.
So can you describe that piece and where it was and how you
In
came
Mill
to do it?
Valley, I got some people who had a car, and we drove up, and I had an old blasting license from Colorado. On my way hitchhiking, I took a job.
A blasting license,
Yeah,
a
I
license
could
to
buy
blow
the
things
I
up.
could buy the shit.
TNT or something like that.
It wasn't TNT, it was something else, it was dynamite. But I went in a shop, I bought it, signed my name, and went out there and got some people to drive me out, dug a few holes, put the craters in, went away and hit the thing. I was excited.
How many craters, and did they all go off at once?
I don't remember how many there were. They were simultaneous. Yes, they all went off at once.
And you were just saying that you originally intended that each crater was...
Not originally. While I was doing it, I was convinced that each crater was a separate entity and a separate production.
a separate work of art? In effect?
Total. It turned out it was just of a gesamt concept.
Generic
Generic.
event.
Yeah, but it took a long time for me to figure that out.
And that piece you did in 1960, and
guess, yeah.
it is really, I mean, it is effectively earth art in a way. I know that
Yes,
term
it
didn't
is.
exist
I
then,
was so excited when I discovered the other people doing things out in the middle of nowhere.
which didn't come till quite a bit later, right? I mean, Smith.
Well, it was, I have no sense of time. It was a little later, yes. But it wasn't a precursor. They knew what they were doing before, while I was doing it.
So, but this work that you did, the cratering piece in Mill Valley, was very different from the idiom of art in the Bay Area at that time. I mean, that Connor was doing the assemblages, and it was a very, it was a very unique.
He was doing
sensibility.
assemblages with the dolls,
Yeah,
ripping
things
them
like
to
that.
pieces. But there was somebody, and I don't remember, I always thought it was Robert Morris, I guess it's not. But there was somebody who did something on an airplane with the tires going up and down the aisle, printing. And it was not, I'm terribly sorry. I'm very proud of having spent the last 75 years of my life making things, but they weren't radical. What was radical was because they let somebody in, probably from the wrong postal code, who could put up with the idea of living so badly and for what they were making. Other than that, there wasn't anything heroic that I did.
Well, not heroic, but definitely new. I think you changed the parameters of art making. I mean, the cratering piece alone was such a fresh gesture.
I hope.
Yeah. And so before we get back to your art, because I know you didn't actually spend that much time in the Bay Area and you went back to New York, but before we get to that, I
I
know
went a lot around here, yeah.
Right. So tell us a little bit about your involvement in protests in Berkeley. What was going on there?
That was
late
something
50s?
else. Some of the people came up and said these kids they've got excess capital, and they might just help. And it was helping of trying to get decent wages and get the mafia out of the Harry Bridges, getting the mafia out of San Francisco thing. And it was also about the fact that nobody wants to remember it was 1964, before the United States was not a segregated country. And to some of us that grew up, it meant a lot. And after we put it all together, we realized that with the influences of the church and such, it didn't really make much difference. It's like not wanting to be supported by people who are collecting money all over the United States to go back to Nigeria to kill boys who are not doing what they're supposed to, which is working and raising a family and being good to their mother. Which meant that they were killing all children who looked like homosexuals, but they were collecting the money here. So who wants to get involved with these nonsense people? These are just a bunch of middle-class people who basically have to be supported because most of the time, as most people, their children are not too bright. But essentially, they were vicious motherfuckers, and now it's becoming obvious with what we see with the politics on the television here, that those people should have been told, you can think that, but you'll have to go live somewhere else, because this is the United States, and we don't believe in slavery. We really don't.
So did you go to the South during the Civil Rights movement?
I did.
What transpired down there for you?
We did some good, and I got hurt, and some other people got hurt, and we did some good, and some other people got hurt, and that was the end of it. And then by the time we got to the middle class taking over the university structure and all, it was all thrown away. Totally thrown away. You can be a token. Now, who the hell wants to be a token just because your parents were Italian? You want to be a token because your parents were Ukrainian? No, you're not a token, you're a person. Okay, and is that a good enough answer?
Yes. So you went back to New York and you started painting again, but...
No, I was painting all the time out here, but I started making, I lost personally my desire to participate in this world that we were in, and I made only things for children, little toys and...
When you came back to New York from San Francisco?
It was a hard time to reintegrate back in. And then somehow or other, I guess, one night in the middle of the night, working in the studio, something came up, and I started to make a series of paintings that seemed to answer another question that people were asking. And when it stopped answering that, I made another series of something. And
so was that the television signal paintings?
Yeah, the television and things.
Yeah, so for people who don't know, this was a series of paintings that he did that had an abstract form that looked like the signal you used to see on TVs when they went down.
It was the signal. It was the signal.
It was a signal.
Somebody gave me a television that only got 2 stations. Right. One of them had a signal on at night, and I worked with it.
Right, but it was like when they shut down the studio for the night, and if you had the TV on,
yeah,
that's what you'd see.
You have to remember that my path was opened up. My path was an easy one, personally. People like Jasper Johns and Rauschenberg had done these things that made it, their questions allowed my questions to exist.
Right. So John's flag.
All of the people who could name it, really, the list is enormous. But that's what art's about. That's what's so exciting about these museums opening up in the States and things, is that when you come in, what you're thinking trips with something else. I mean, Jack Wendler and I did 3 books together, you realize. That's a lot of books, and they're all existing, and they've even reprinted some of them.
So,
but nobody wanted them at the time. The 8th Street Bookshop wouldn't take this book that you're carrying because it wasn't a real book.
It's got a cover, it's got pages. So this was your first artist book. It's called Statements.
First one that got printed, yes.
First one that got printed. It has 24 statements.
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah.
I never counted it.
And the first one is actually a statement referring to the Cratering piece. Yeah. And let's see, I can actually read that. A field cratered by structured simultaneous TNT explosions.
It seems to be pretty up on the table.
Right. So it's interesting, though, because I guess one way of thinking of your statements is that they're opportunities for the manifestation of a condition. You could do it or you could not do it, but they are statements of possibility. But this statement came after the piece. It was 8 years or so after the actual the Cratering.
Yeah, when I came down to putting statements together, I used a lot of the work I had done along the way.
So you sort of crafted the statement in a way retroactively to describe
Or I was
something.
convinced I was, yes.
And talk a bit about how you arrived at this notion that the art could consist of a statement.
It was anger. I by luck, grew up in a situation where I had gotten a reasonably good education publicly. And I maybe wasn't so stupid, so I was interested. But then I turned around and I realized that this was all being left on the side. And I wanted to build a structure and an art that allowed everybody to come in and bring what they knew, but at the same time not have to tell a lie. So I began to try to craft this together. I call it designing. I can't do that anymore because through my life, I've entered into the design world and it seems to have worked. So you don't call it designing because the other designers really know how to design, or I don't. It was just by luck. So it was a matter of just trying very desperately to open things up to such an extent that the things that you saw didn't have to be put into a concise package. That's it.
And also, I understand that you very much wanted to avoid metaphor or illustration.
I don't believe in metaphor because the trouble with metaphor is it's the same thing as like, be a good girl because your mother's a good person. Yes, she is. What the hell's that got to do with you being a good girl? Nothing. That's a metaphor that's telling people that what you're saying is correct, but they have to accept your lifestyle, your values, and your structure. I would much rather destroy the world and make people accept my lifestyle and values and structure when they don't want to, when it's not necessary to survive. My apologies, I really feel that.
So I'm just going to read a few more of these. A removal to the lathing or support wall of plaster or wallboard from a wall.
Yeah, that's the generalization. The other one is a foot by a foot or a meter and a meter. The idea that removal is just as important as intrusion is not such a radical idea. Every sculptor that you've ever seen that was carving stone makes it sculpture by removing stone. Well, I was just taking the material itself and removing it. And that seemed to me to be sufficient. It seemed to have mattered.
And as I understand it, one of your, as you were just describing it, your reasons for beginning to make art out of words and sort of simple statements about removal or addition or shifting of things was to get to a kind of a clarity or reality that was accessible and not your imposition onto the viewer of a what? Of a feeling or of what?
No, of the thing itself. Here's a problem about it. One potato, two potato. The whole problem is that there comes a point where I was not able to express it with a drawing or with a line without building another mise en scène, and language was sufficient. And then in the end, it was the thing itself. And it didn't matter what background you had, what language you were speaking, what your education was. It had to do with the fact that one potato, two potato, three potato more. It all had to add together, and that's what I got involved in. But you know, I must tell you, I don't know how to explain this. I don't know who I'm talking to, really. But you have to not forget something. There were people that took this very seriously. You might have to have hitched to Chicago, or you might have to gone to Toronto to talk to somebody. But there were people there who took this all very seriously. And in taking it seriously, they opened it up for the entire world. The people who didn't take it seriously set up academic courses. And it's the classic during the civil rights thing, and then later you get to Berkeley or something, and somebody's giving a lecture on a particular battle that you were involved in. And you're listening and listening, and there's somebody there, and they're very old, because I was very young. And they say things like, "You're so-and-so." And you say, "Yes, you're the kid." "Yes, I was the kid." They weren't there. And I said, "They weren't there, but what's the difference? They're not telling a lie." Many people associate with all sorts of things in the art world that didn't exist. You know, you talk to somebody in New York, you're a New Yorker, that has convinced that they were talking to Jackson Pollock. Well, Jackson Pollock was dead for 3 years before they arrived in New York. Maybe they were, maybe they had a Ouija board, but what business? I was at a panel with John Bolisario, and one of these other artists that are our generation was talking about how they and somebody invented something and did the NEA. It was all nonsense. In fact, it was so nonsensical that he said nothing and I said nothing. We just sat very quietly. And at the end of it, people ask questions and say, "I don't remember, I wasn't there." The point is we have to decide what's important. And what's important is the thing that's put on the table for people, the thing that they get to handle. And that could be words, that could be a gesture, that could be light, that could be... There were fabulous artists in California when I first came out in the 60s that were doing all this work. You'd hear it in the sound, in the walls and things. I don't know what happened to that work, and I'm not sure, but I was very impressed.
What you mean, musicians or?
Yeah, but I mean artists. I don't care whether they call themselves musicians or sculptors or dancers or whatever they call them. Artists. They were making these things that intrigued me.
Like what?
Making installations in the wall that made noise, that were building sculptures.
Interesting. This was in the late 50s in San Francisco?
No, this was in the early 60s.
Early 60s.
In LA more than San Francisco.
Okay. So you mentioned the word mise en scène, and it sounded when you were just talking that it was something you wanted to avoid, that you wanted to get something.
Oh, no, I want it to be a mise en scène, but I wanted to have a sense that it's open for people to have a situation that's possible. It's like here, this is a mise en scène. No matter what I think about museums doesn't matter. What I think about education doesn't matter. I'm a real believer that real education is real education. It's not about opinions. But this, I couldn't exist without the people here pulling it together. Now, as an artist, that's one of the things that reminds you that you're part of the society and you're responsible for what you do. When you fuck up, you fuck up. Okay. There's not much you can do about it. Say, mea culpa, sorry. But you'll have to accept the fact that if you want people to give you dignity, you have to give them the dignity of being responsible for what you've done. And the work that I've been showing here, and this work, I'm very proud of, because it's a simple thing. But in fact, the mise en scène is my taking the trouble to design an installation, and people taking the trouble to present it.
So is another word for the mise en scène, would you say the context? And what role does the context play for you?
Context doesn't work anymore. The Academy screwed context. They don't get it. I mean, the fact that Marcel Duchamp had to have a coffee in the morning and a cigarette, that's his context. No, it's not. It was his necessity. It had nothing to do with the fact of what he was trying to do, good or bad. And there's a lot bad.
So there's ways in which your text pieces function in a way in a pure conceptual form, independent of material, and they can exist as a pure idea, but then they also exist in specific, we can call it a mise en scène or a context, as a book or on a wall or in a film.
They're an idea because they're about something real.
Right, they refer to the material.
Refer to the materials, and that's what the work is about. It's about the materials.
But would you say that their meaning changes depending on whether they're in a book or on a wall or in America or in Poland?
No, but I do think that there are a difference if they're in Poland or America, yes.
And how does the meaning change?
How does it change? If in Poland or America, in order to be able to use it, you have to accept the value structure of it. It's against what I believe in. You don't have to believe in the value structure. Facts are facts. There's a difference. But the value structure is mom and pop, it's something else.
So you're trying to strip away the necessity of believing in a value structure to get to facts.
Exactly, to get to being able to use it. That you don't have to spend all of our resources and all of our time saying, so-and-so who's not like us is sort of okay to do this. No, it has nothing to do with that. It's what it is. If it's any good, all the different structures could fit into it. If it's not any good, it's not any good.
So many of your pieces have to do with simple materials, a wall or a rug.
All of them have to do with materials that are all accessible to everybody.
Right, but there are some, and forgive me for using this word, but I'm going to use this word, you may hate it, images that appear in your work consistently. One, maybe it's not so much an image as a motif, is the sea or water.
Yes.
Why, and we have it here. Why is that? Why is there this current, if you will, through your work? And just take that one example. And how does it relate to the desire to reduce your work to facts?
We all go down to the sea in ships, don't we?
That sounds very romantic to me.
I think that is the most problematic problem. Of course it's romantic. You have one goddamn life in front of you, and then you have a choice. You're a kid from the slums. Okay, you got a choice. You work in 7-Eleven, or you find some exotic work on the docks or doing, bodyguarding. You find something. You have a choice. You choose to be romantic or you choose to be safe. I sort of, as a kid, chose to be romantic.
That sounds pretty metaphorical.
No, it's not. It's reality. As a child, you have a choice. You either do what you said. Like, I had to go to California. Everybody said, you should really, you have skills, get it, do a job, learn how to drive, buy a car and go to California. That would have been 18 months after I had been there. Okay, so I chose the romance. The hell with it, get on the road. I figured I was a tough enough kid that I could make it across the land, but I didn't have to be that tough. Most people that picked me up were really nice. The only big problem was I couldn't do the winter easily. I had to do the back and forth. It had to be in the 58. Was that the name of
the highway?
The highway,
66?
Yeah, because all of these sailors going back to their ships.
I did that, and I was a girl.
Yeah, why not? I knew a lot of girls that I met on the road. Yep.
I didn't know.
Two or three truck drivers would say, "Hey, listen,
You stay away from
take these kids. No, take care of these kids." And they were kids. They were like 20-year-old girls or something, together. And they put me in the truck with them because I could speak with them. But I have no idea what's wrong with. I mean, I thought it was normal. It was a pity my daughter, when she reached that age, she had to go across with somebody. It was no longer possible to do it. There used to be a whole underground railroad of so-called, what they call kinky guys, that would talk about these things that these sailors wanted to talk about that they read about in the newspaper or saw. And they'd give you a ride to San Diego.
Were you a longshoreman? Did you work on the docks?
I worked as a longshoreman. I worked with pink tickets. I worked as a temporary longshoreman.
And then you lived on a boat in Amsterdam?
We still do. Alice and I still live on the same boat.
And you're wearing a sailor's hat.
No, as a matter of fact, it was supposed to be a sailor's hat, but I did it for this show in Utrecht. Because they didn't have enough money for the sailor's hat, so this is the stuff you use in the kitchens. This is the stuff from the kitchen.
Chef's hat. Well, it's
yeah. Why
it was
not?
A sailor's hat.
It works.
It worked on me. Yeah.
Works on me too. So.
So I want to talk about our piece, but before we get there, I hope you can say a little bit about your work in film, because we are the Berkeley Art Museum and Pacific Film Archive, and I think maybe people,
Brampton and I did a talk here. Remember, they threw things at us.
Here? You and Hollis
Yes,
Frampton, and they threw things at you?
Yeah.
I'm ashamed for us.
Why? Why? You have no idea what we were saying. Maybe what we were saying.
Maybe you deserved it. Yeah, well.
Maybe we deserved it, okay.
When was that?
I'd be damned if I remember. But you'd have it written down somewhere.
Somewhere, yeah. I'll look in the records. So I think in 1973 was your first film, somewhere around there, maybe.
Yeah, that's when it came out in '73. So I had done some little things here and there, but it was the first quarter. It was called, and Jack was one of the people who walked in, and Leo Castelli was freaking out how he was going to deal with it, and Jack said, "I'll take part of it on."
That's great. Thanks,
Yeah.
Jack.
No, that was really done on that level. It wasn't any kind of, let us go and change this culture, let us take a red flag and walk through the streets. No, the hell with it. Let's just act like everybody else is wearing a little red pin or something.
So you've called yourself at least once, I read, I think a sensual artist. And
I am a sensual
You are a sensual
artist.
artist. And some of your films are quite sensual. And
Oh, you know me. There was a film in 1976. The kitchen came to me and said, "You know how to do this, and you get along with these people. Can you make us a porn tape against the
a porn tape.
Them putting people in jail for doing porn?"
Right.
So I did a porn tape in '76, and then the Swiss Institute came back to me, I guess recently, in the last 3, 4, 5 years, 6 years, and said, "We've got a problem with censorship. Will you take it on?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." I didn't say yeah, sure, but I took it on. That's it. Other than that, it's not a subject that even interests me that much. The repercussions of people who try to do it was a problem for me. I don't like people being put in jail for doing things that don't do any harm to anybody and are trying to break open boundaries.
And more recently, you've been making music.
Not recently, not for the last 8 or 10 years, but I did all this work with Ned Sublette, and I did a lot of work with Peter Gordon and Dickie Landry. So I've been very lucky. A lot of musicians who seem to understand what I was doing seem to be willing to work with me.
That's great. So let's talk about this piece.
Yeah.
This phrase or these phrases.
You want it is for sale.
When you got the invitation to do a piece for this space,
Yeah.
how did you arrive at this one, and what?
Oh, that's something that I'm going to have to make an admission. I do things that are specific for places, but they're based upon whatever I'm working on at the moment. And if it didn't work that way, it wouldn't be really quite right. So I was working on things to do with the idea of the gesture left and the gesture right. And that's what came out. And it fit what we needed for Berkeley. Can't do any better.
So the gesture in this case are the way the forms lean.
The fact that
One
there's
way?
a different meaning, leaning towards one way or leaning towards another. Think about it. Think about it. There's a different meaning by virtue of leaning what it chose to look at.
So you're looking in one direction and
Or looking in the
you look in
other.
the other and you
Yeah.
see something completely
Yeah,
different.
yeah,
So
yeah.
what is laid out on the banks? Is
A
that
river.
a person? Is that
No, this usually just fabric, but it could be a person. I mean, the way the world we've come into, the world my grandson's coming into, people lying on the side of the bank of a river is quite normal. For me, it's not normal, but it exists. This is all about fabrics and things.
about fabric?
And material, or night soil for all you want. I would.
Just anything.
Anything.
Anything laid out
Yeah,
on the bank of a
matter,
river.
as they call it.
And why on the banks of a river? What is the?
Rivers are connected to the entire substructure of our life. Running water as we know it is substructure of our life. That's why. That's like asking somebody, why do you put something on a horizon? To stick up.
And tell me about these forms that look like maybe banners or
They are sort of like strips, stickers
stickers.
that
yeah,
go on people's
labels
things.
or something.
Labels.
Yeah.
That's a nice word.
Yeah.
Labels.
And the color, the red.
That's all emotional. Don't even get into that. Artists make things and they make things and they have to have a color. And black and white is a color. So once you realize that black and white is a color, then whatever choose is all emotional.
Emotional.
Emotional. It's a nice word. You chose that that's the color you think it should be.
So you did a book, I think, in the 70s that was
Green
in,
as well as blue, red as well as blue.
you did a wonderful book in the 70s. It was in part about a woman putting on lipstick.
Oh, the one in Poland.
Yes. So that made me think that maybe this has something to do with that.
No. That was a fabulous book. I was working in '79. I had a little problem with the Polish regime, but I was getting an Order of Lenin. And I remember doing
You were getting a prize.
No, an Order of Lenin. This just meant that I was allowed to talk in public.
Oh, okay.
And I remember I wanted to go in this gum thing and work with these people. And they said, you can't do it, you can't do it. And finally this woman came back and said, he has enough centimeters, he can do it. Interesting idea of culture. I kept looking down, have I gained that much weight? No, but they meant is they cut out things from art history books. And when it lasted to a certain point, you couldn't be in trouble for letting the person do it. So I had enough centimeters to do it, but that's a very important book for me.
Yeah. So
It was from a show, though. It was from a piece that I showed in Dusseldorf, initially with a little sticker.
that piece about the lipstick, yeah.
No, it wasn't about, it was about an object made to resemble another object kind of thing. Yeah.
Great. So is there anything else you want to tell us about this piece? And is it different seeing it in person? Does it matter?
What I would like to say is that the reason that I do this dog and pony show is that it gets people in to see this. That's what I want from them. Just show it. People will know what to do with it. As I said, people are not stupid.
All right. So I'm curious if there are any questions for Lawrence. Lawrence, I hope you don't mind taking a question
I don't mind
or two.
anything. I'm here. I'm here for a purpose. Let's just do it. But I don't know what
is
kind
your
of
chance.
question. You tell me if it was any use for you to see it. It is awfully well done, by the way. I'd
Apsara
like
has a question. Wait for the mic, Apsara.
Oh.
Thank you. Is it on? Yeah. I am wondering about geography in relation to your work and the natural landscape. You touched upon this a little bit, but I've noticed, and I know you don't refer to your work as being site-specific, but it does seem so much considered in relation to the landscape and referring to the landscape. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the significance of the natural landscape and geography in relation to you thinking and working on and citing a work. Does that make sense?
That's really rather odd because when you think about specific landscape is quite specific. This idea of, I was so happy to go with Alice in a car yesterday to show her where I lived rough, as a matter of fact, here years ago. But if you look at something, if you're working on something, of course it's the natural order. And any place you put it that you're taking, I can change the materials. If they're making coal, you use coal. But essentially, any place you put any of this, it will work. It has no natural landscape because I'm a city person. Don't tell me that the person with a breezeway is more landscape than the person sitting in the city. No, they're about the same. It's whatever is the environment. It's good enough for me. Is that an answer?
Yes, Gloria. Hold on for the mic, Gloria.
Oh, you need a mic up so people behind you. Oh, right. But it does seem very site-specific at times.
Hopefully, it should feel site-specific.
The piece that you did in New York Harbor, for instance.
Oh, that one, but that was a piece that was first shown in, God knows where, somewhere in the Midwest, in Philadelphia or so.
What about the piece in Germany that's up on top of a building and talks
That's
about
a funny piece because it
crashing
was
in the
from
night?
that. It was during a show I was doing in Vienna. But in fact, that could be any place. It was not about the Kristallnacht. It was about really.
It wasn't.
No, and my answer at the time was, if you got problems, you got problems. They ain't mine.
You mean it could have been just about someone throwing dishes at each other or having
No,
a fight?
not dishes, but there's a sound all through Vienna that everybody knows. You can hear beer bottles breaking in the night.
Beer bottles. But that piece in
Yeah,
Vienna,
and-
didn't you
and
actually...
they sound differently during the day as they do during the night.
Didn't you actually do that piece before going to Vienna?
Yeah.
And it really was about something completely different.
Nothing to do with Vienna, and nothing to do with Kristallnacht, which Vienna has nothing to do with.
Right, but still, you put the work there and knowing or being aware
No,
that...
people came along and they had a guilty conscience and they associated it with Kristallnacht. I never said a word.
Or it made people feel good that someone was memorializing it.
I should hope so, because my whole point is that it should be a positive gesture. And some of the things that I say that sound heavy, they're just heavy because they were heavy. Nothing to do with me. You know, when people complained to me in Poland in '79 when I did the lipstick thing, oh, we used to have it. I had found some food in the subway. I was eating because I was drinking too much and I wanted to sop it up. And I looked up and said, you know, it's your problem. You have a problem, I don't. Because I wasn't doing it about that. If you have a guilty conscience, you have a guilty conscience. Leave me out of it. I didn't have anything to do with Kristallnacht. I wasn't
back?
even born.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hey, I saw a video that someone made of you, and you were talking about Helvetica as a font.
Oh, Helvetica, yeah.
And you know, you said like a lot. You had a lot of like opinion about Helvetica, and I wanted to know how you got to those opinions. Whether it was like how Helvetica is used in the world, or it's just how it feels when you see
No,
it.
what happened to it? There's really inherently, style-wise, I don't find Helvetica interesting. But there's really nothing inherent with it that's wrong.
Yeah, I want to know.
What the
like,
problem is that it assumed a position of authority. And I would like to have designed a typeface that didn't have a position of authority, but was perhaps rather elegant.
Right, yeah. I'm interested in.
What's wrong with that? What's wrong with
I'm interested in like exact styles of typeface relating into emotion.
No, it doesn't work that way. It's not a commodity. It's not a commodity. It's something that becomes a necessity. I just designed a typeface for the shed in New York that's just vertical because it's bricks, and I didn't want them to have to cut or paint the bricks or break them. But that's just skill, that's all. You try to make things the way you want. You don't buy clothes that make you look the way your aunt said you should look, or your uncle. You buy clothes the way you want to look as a kid. That's what art's about. We get a choice to choose how to present it. The society gets a choice of not accepting it. And then you get down to this problem about graffiti. Well, you have a right to make graffiti, and it just has to say something. Like my children are hungry, or the sky is blue. If it just says me, Jose, 42nd Street, go to hell. Who cares? Everybody wakes up with existential problems. You don't get a right to fuck up a building or cover a window because you don't feel good existentially. But if the sky is blue or your children are hungry, and that's the wall, do it. And do it well. Do it in an elegance and a panache that you would like to see the rest of the world determine. And if you succeed, bravo. You know, and if you don't, it's like one tells, with a few times I have to, because I don't teach, because I don't think that artists should have the authority. But you tell them, you know, like you chose an art world life, and you didn't make it, okay, but you had a really better life than if you had pushed a wagon in the middle of the garment district, I assure you.
Okay.
When you and Larry were talking about the wall piece, you referred to looking left and looking right, and I just started to wonder whether you were thinking about political references when you were coming up with this.
The metaphorical understanding of it. Everything does. Do you know anybody who gets out of bed that doesn't have made up their political choice? I don't. There are people who do, but they don't interest me. Yes, there is a politics more to the content than there is to anything else, but it's not a reference to anything. It just happens that right now, any artist who's dealing with catastrophic things finds themselves in a very enviable position because the world is catastrophically racing towards some sort of an end. But other than that, no, the work is not designed. It's designed politically to not be racist, not be sexist. And the word fascism doesn't mean anything anymore, so it's what it is.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm interested in your talking about art being useful.
Yes.
And I'm curious if you could tell us about some artworks that you found useful and how you found them useful.
No. No, not to be difficult. It's just that, like we're sitting and we're talking about San Francisco in the 50s. This is 2017. They don't relate. It's just history. I'd much rather talk about what's done now. And what was useful for me was useful to get through it, but I don't have any keywords. I'm sorry, I don't. I think that every work that I've ever put up, and I've been getting really good feedback over the years, helps somebody figure something out. The idea of the piece, even the piece in New York on the manhole covers, in line, in direct line with another and the next. Do you know that most people understand what that means? And that's the politics. Okay. My being an American socialist, believing that all children should have an education and hospital care and food and a roof on their head, that has nothing to do with why I make art. It's about what I make art about, and that's it. And I really still believe all of this. It's like I'm convinced, and I'm going to get this as my finishing thing. There are these people out there that cannot get, besides needing Viagra, they cannot get excited about anything unless they're taking something from somebody. And that somebody can get a hard-on from taking a breakfast away from children is something that distresses me, but I don't make art about it. I make art that I hope that when those people understand what I'm doing, they'll commit suicide, because I really am fed up with the whole thing. Okay? They destroyed even the Black Panthers, not because of what they stood for, but because they gave children breakfast that were going to be competition for their children. Now, I'm sorry, I didn't grow up that way. I was differently brought up that all children deserve breakfast to go to school. And we don't live in that anymore, okay? California has little remnants, especially Northern California, of people who wanted to do good. Now it's time for them to get up on their haunches and do good. End of my little conversation. Thank you so much.
Well, I think that's a good proverb to end on. So thank you, Lawrence Weiner.
It was a shaggy story to get around why we make art. And there was an artist named, John McCracken, who was sitting at a dinner once, and he looked up. No, I like John. I like the work a lot. But he looked up, and there was another artist, myself and Alice and Gail, and he looked up and he said, "I'm so happy to be here with you guys." And everybody, being the normal bitches that they are, turned around and said, "Why?" And he said, with dead seriousness, "Because you believe what I believe, that when you make art, it makes you a better person." And I think that's the answer. When you make art, it makes you a better person. And I've always just loved the idea that here's this tough Marlboro Man type artist looking up and saying the truth. You make art because you really think it makes everything better. It makes you understand what a piece of stone and a piece of wood and a piece of salt is. And of course, but really, but I'm so pleased with this. Thank you all so much for this. I love good installations of mine because I wouldn't show it if I didn't want to. And you don't often get, now in my later years it's easier, you don't often get that many talented people willing to present what you're doing. And when you get it, if you don't say, wow, thank you, then you really don't deserve shit. I'm sorry. It's all art is people putting things together. Okay, thank you.